One of the coolest things in the sphere of DC Comics right now, in my opinion, are the John Jackson Miller Burtonverse midquels, a duology of books taking place following the original Batman 1989 film and preceding its sequel, Batman Returns. And honestly, the first book was an utterly brilliant ride and was one of the strongest pieces of Batman media I experienced in a while. Burton's world is different, aged, and complex, but simple in regards to the Caped Crusader and his lore, something that the comic books are, well, long past. You may remember or have seen my retrospective on the first book, Batman Resurrection, and you may also recall I truly loved that book. Well, did John Jackson Miller strike gold a second time? The answer, in my opinion, is yes. By the way, spoilers ahead for the novel. Batman Resurrection was a book that dropped on October of 2024, and a year and some change later, the sequel dropped, Batman Revolution, a book designed to pay off the Riddler tease from the first book. From the start, this was planned to be a 2-book arc, so there really wasn't a ton of drama in the development, except one minor hiccup. Alright, I'm going to take you on a bit of a confusing journey through the continuity of the Burtonverse. To start off, the Tim Burton films and Joel Schumacher films were all one solid continuity despite actor changes, though this was eventually reversed. The Arrowverse sees the Burtonverse as Earth 89, though simultaneously another comic continuity, Earth 789, sees both the Batman 1989 films and the Christopher Reeve Superman films in one canon. Ultimately, canon barely matters, but one contradiction this book kind of had to deal with was Batman 89 Echoes, which was a comic miniseries also taking place in the Burtonverse with a very different Riddler that was in production at the same time as this book. Of course, the book explains this, but John Jackson Miller was basically on record saying that both he and the writer of Echoes, who also happened to be the writer of the original Batman films, Sam Hamm, was writing their stories at the same time, and by the time either knew, it was kind of too late to turn back and pick a different villain, which is of course a problem in something like this where you have DC Comics working on official continuation comics and Random House Worlds, the book's publisher, is also licensed to work on the Batman 89 IP outside of DC's main office. My guess is that this was a big editorial flub at the end of the day. But they had caught it, and John Jackson Miller added some pages to explain that Edward Maynard, the Riddler from the comic, and Norman Pincus, John Jackson Miller's Riddler from the book, were two totally separate entities. Anyhow, after Gotham's first attempt to create a bicentennial went up in flames during the Joker's infamous reign over Gotham, Max Schreck, one of Gotham's biggest businessmen, announced a second try at the festival following his discovery that he is a descendant of a great Revolutionary War hero, though this was proven to be untrue by the Riddler, who vandalizes Max's faux documents, proving his lineage. Anyhow, a new group of terrorists, the Eterna Militia, are in Gotham attempting horrible things in the supposed push towards revolution. Meanwhile, Norman Pincus is the man behind the Riddler, and his life is a quaint one, though this is all changed when he gets a hit puzzle column in the Gotham Globe, and he befriends Alexander Knox, Lena Kyle, and Elena when he's dragged onto a double date by Knox. Gaining his confidence, he tries getting a raise for his column. It falls through and he's fired. His sick beloved mother dies due to chemical pollution as she worked at Axis Chemicals, the plant that the Joker blew up in the first movie. He's evicted from his house and his whole life is basically screwed and up in flames. He moves back to the library where he and his mother lived when his father abandoned them to dodge out on the Red Scare of the 1950s. There he finds the base of the Eterna Militia and becomes a figurehead for the group due to his intelligence and surprising confidence he gains when he puts Norman Pincus in the background and comes to the forefront as the Riddler. He starts a relationship with Camille, who as it turns out is the same person as Elena, who he went on a double date with earlier, and she's the leader of the Eterna Militia, who also has a strange guardian angel through Killer Moth. Anyhow, Riddler finds out about the history of Gotham's revolutionary roots and decides to mess with Max Shreck's second bicentennial celebration as a way to stick it to the rich and powerful in Gotham. Though as it turns out, these pranks and petty crimes Norman is a figurehead of isn't all that he thought they were. Camille has her mind on bigger plans to kill droves of Gothamites and pinning the murders on the rich, bringing on a nationwide revolution, hypothetically. Norman doesn't love it, but he sticks around because he loves Camille. Anyhow, Camille captured a bunch of rich elites, including Gotham's governor, mayor, Bruce Wayne, and Max Shreck, and they even nab Alfred after taking over Wayne Manor. Bruce and Alfred break out, and Batman plans to stop this craziness, but of course Camille's terrorist schemes come to a head, to the surprise of the Riddler. Batman foils it, and the gang eventually all head back to the Gotham Library, which is preparing for demolition. A battle that shows that Killer Moth is Camille's dad, but won't say, since he faked his death following his robotic wings prototype being stolen by Max Shreck and his business associate. Camille in anger tries killing Killer Moth in anger, but the bullets ricochet off of his suit, killing her. In an attempt to save her, Killer Moth takes off with her, but his suit stalls and the duo crash down, causing an explosion, which starts the Gotham Library on fire. The Riddler, who is only loosely complacent, steps up to help Batman. As it turns out, the place was also laced with bombs designed to spread Smilex, the Joker's old serum, across Gotham. The duo stop it, but Riddler is horribly burned and on the brink of death. Later on, Alexander Knox leaves Gotham, having gotten a grant from Bruce Wayne. Bruce stops these riots caused by the Riddler by getting Basil Karlo, Clayface, from the last book to help him stop the madness, and finally, Norman is captured by Hugo Strange in an attempt to bring him along with a fan of Norman's, Edward Maynard. Norman pretends to have lost his mind and Hugo just lets him go, but he meets a nurse who, like him, dreams of moving to Hollywood to work behind the scenes in film. So they do, which also, kind of ties back to his dad's story of being a Hollywood artist. Batman, or Bruce Wayne, takes a bit of a back seat in this novel, but is complacent, much like a lot of the rich and powerful in Gotham, for having made the revolutionaries he's forced to fight throughout this novel, especially the Riddler. Back when the Riddler was an informant for Gordon, known as the Bookworm, Batman laughs him off, having solved many of the cases the Riddler did in his own way, and not really wanting a partner. He also has his Smilex ward, which at one point Norman hopes to get his mother into. After all, she was a victim of Axe's chemicals, and the lawsuit fell through due to Batman capturing one of Joker's old accountants, proving Axe's chemicals was definitively a corrupt organization and the money going to the Gotham City evidence locker. The problem with this is the Smilex ward, based on verbiage, is specifically for Smilex victims and not other victims, even if it was caused by Axe's chemicals, similar and related substances, thus making her exempt from care. Of course, Bruce Wayne was too busy being Batman that even when Norman gets a miracle favor from District Attorney Harvey Dent, he couldn't get through to Bruce and thus wasn't getting the care she needed. For these reasons, Norman hates Bruce Wayne and Batman for separate reasons. Batman gets a little bit of development himself, learning that Joe Chill was an accomplice in his parents' murder, the Riddler telling Gordon, but the Riddler's mom fearing retribution if they had gained too much attention, given that they were homeless, pulled the letter delaying Joe Chill's justice by decades. Eventually, Bruce gains more compassion for the cops having to work in the system, and that ultimately he is there to fill those gaps in the system that caused Joe Chill to go undetected and get away with his parents' murder, rather than being a be-all end-all replacement for the police officers. Batman also ends up working with the Riddler at the end, who he coldly denied earlier in the story, proving partnerships work and kind of paving the way for Robin in the Batman 89 comic series later on. Alfred is a puzzle solver and has a lot of fun moments solving puzzles in this book about puzzles. He is captured late in the novel, but proves he can be a pretty solid liar who still has an edge of espionage that he used in his youth. He worries about Bruce and wants him to chill. This isn't really new grounds, though. That's just Alfred. The Riddler, or the Bookworm, or Norman Pincus, is a man who has never lived. During the Communist Red Scare of the 1950s, his dad skipped town, scared that his family would be put through bad things if he stuck around, only to die an old alcoholic. Norman lived in the Gotham Library as a homeless child, more or less, with his mother, who also kind of coddled Norman, not wanting the world to catch up to him. As an adult, he has never kissed a woman, is squeamish around people, and is scared to let his talents out in the open, based in part off of his fears and based in part off of his mother's fears. Despite this, he starts helping reporters at the Gotham Globe, such as Alexander Knox, and sending tips of crimes he cracks to the Gotham PD. He loves his dying mother, but after a double date with Selina Kyle, Elena, and Alexander Knox, learns to get some confidence, putting himself out there to help Batman directly, jumping in on a lawsuit against Axis Chemicals, and hoping to court Elena. He also has a successful column at the Gotham Globe, Riddle Me This. He hopes to get royalties on that, but that kind of fails when his life crashes apart. First, the lawsuit's thrown out after he gives a tip on the Joker's accountant, leading to his arrest and Gotham taking the funds, making it impossible for him to afford the medical bills to keep his mother alive. And as you know, if you're a citizen of the United States, our health system is absolutely fucked. Anyhow, on top of that, his mother dies and he confronts Harvey Dent, giving cause for the Globe to fire him. The Globe, of course, happy for the excuse not to share the Riddle Me This royalties with him, so he starts solving their puzzles under the guise of the Riddler, also calling people to action to commit petty crimes as he starts getting attention from Camille, the first woman to give him any sort of time of day. As it turns out, pranks and petty crime, even kidnapping the rich, wasn't the only plan, and that the Eterna militia, through Elena, wanted to kill people en masse. Riddler sticks around for a bit out of love for Camille, but eventually helps Batman in the library, learning the horrible truth, and after being injured, runs out of Gotham to live a quaint life again, albeit a life where he isn't hiding the way he once did. Norman is both the protagonist and secondary antagonist, and is honestly more interesting than I can describe here. There are so many good character moments I didn't describe. I absolutely loved this take on the Riddler. I like sympathetic villains, and this being a new take on the Riddler in its kind of very loose way, sort of like the other Batman villains from the Burtonverse, makes this a pretty great and unique take on the character. Alexander Knox is one of Norman's only friends, only he barely knows Norman exists. He has a problem with the Globe's politics and is one of the few reporters there with a spine to stand up to villains like Max Schreck, who's just a huge asshole. Eventually, he gets a grant allowing him to travel the world and do international journalism, somewhat explaining why he skipped town and isn't in Batman Returns, while also reuniting him with Vicky Vale. I like this story. He's still kind of weird and annoying, like he was in the original film, but he has a lot of great moments with Norman, and I think John Jackson Miller did a really good job of building up Alexander Knox across this book and the previous, which I never loved the character in the films, and I like him quite a bit after the books, so I thought that was pretty impressive. Selina Kyle is also friends with Norman and is one of the few people giving him advice and treating him with compassion. In some ways, she's like him, low on confidence and walked over by all of Gotham's elite, kind of foreshadowing her rise into becoming Catwoman in Batman Returns, with little moments foreshadowing her finding her own spirit, strength, and backbone the way Norman did in this book, for better or for worse. Max Schreck is kind of the main villain of the book in a way. He's just a huge asshole, frankly, starting off by lying about his family roots to the revolutionary heroes that ironically inspired the Eterna militia, and trying to start his new bicentennial festival as a jumping pad into a potential political career. He is captured and is a coward, of course. His fingers are all over things like creating Killer Moth when he and his business partner Fred Raskin stole Killer Moth's company. It all ties back to this tool. He created Norman and Camille in ways, since he was complacent in Gotham's rampant corruption as well. By the end, he kills his business partner, proving he's also willing to get his hands bloody to get ahead. Camille, or Elena, or Emily, is the main villain of the book. A child of circumstance, she grew up rich but lost everything, including her family, after her mother and brother die, and seemingly her father does too. But eventually, of course, we learn that isn't the case. She goes around country to country, involving herself in revolutions and even going to war-torn countries like Cordo Maltese, managing to make it out unscathed because of her guardian angel, or guardian moth, I guess. She takes over the Eterna militia, the group's OGs not liking her methods, but she ultimately is effective and a charismatic planner, getting Norman to be a figurehead for the people, the Riddler. Anyhow, she kind of likes Norman, but more than anything, she uses him to move her plans along. Wanting to make her revolution in blood, knowing Norman's mostly harmless way wouldn't get them very far, very fast. She comes off as being on a revenge quest over a true revolutionary for the people that abruptly ends, and perhaps is highlighted, when she learns her father was Killer Moth the whole time, and in anger and impulsive rage accidentally kills herself with ricocheting bullets off of his armor. She's a good villain, and you can feel bad for her despite her horribly twisted views. It's just kind of a fascinating hero, and I think this whole novel's kind of about seeing people pushed to the brink and how they respond to that. As an extension to that, we have Killer Moth, her father, an inventor who lost everything. He doesn't really want to be in this revolution. He has just sacrificed his life to protect his daughter at this point. He is tragic in this book and taken deadly serious, which is kind of new for Killer Moth, since typically he's more or less a punchline. Ironically, he reminded me a lot, from a power perspective and in some plot ways, of Vulture from Spider-Man Homecoming, a character that would be portrayed by Batman actor Michael Keaton. At the end, he dies trying to save his daughter, and though he's a killer, you get why, and it's a tragic, slippery slope of a life. A man who lost everything trying to protect what he had left, and nothing would stand in his way doing it, ultimately to just lose it all in the end anyways. The Archer's our final side villain and is a serial killer who Batman apprehends early on, but is eventually brought into the militia and does music-based killings, being a former professional cellist, chewed up and spit out by the world. He, however, probably is the least sympathetic and really has the least motivation. He is mostly just a psychopath, but he still has some great moments, and he's not totally unaffected by the world around him, so I think they tried to at least somewhat implement that tragic backstory to him, even if the Archer just had some screws loose anyways. Again, this book has an amazing tone and feels a lot like the Batman 1989 film. The characters are great, especially Norman, and even though I love a psycho Riddler, I mean, look at the King himself, Paul Dano's Riddler, or Riddler from Batman Year Zero from the Scott Snyder run. But this book had me sitting there through the whole thing, hoping Norman would see the truth of the matter and get a happy ending, and John Jackson Miller delivered on that. He kind of gives like Spider-Man 3 Sandman vibes, or Spider-Man 2 Doc Ock vibes. He isn't really a bad guy, just a dude in horrendous circumstances who doesn't handle it well at all. I even felt pretty bad when Camille and her father died, because they had some sympathetic moments and you got where they were coming from as well. Meanwhile, at least in terms of this book, you see people like Max Schreck walk off when he's equally as bad as Camille and her father in many ways. Again, the book is written like a novelization of a film that was never made, which is what we all need, and the reverence for Tim Burton's Batman lore and the wider lore of Batman is virtually unmatched. Burton's world is unique, like Christopher Nolan's world. It isn't the comic book Batman. It's its own thing with its own rules, and John Jackson Miller respects that and writes it as such. This isn't the Batman we see monthly in Detective Comics. This is very specifically Burton's Batman, And I love that this duology does that, and I think it increased my appreciation for this world that Tim Burton created. The book is great. It follows a story where the world just beat the hell out of a guy till he could no longer take it, and he allies with other people who the world beat the hell out of them as well, while the people who did the beating sit comfortably on top. I think the 2020s, especially in the United States, has proven that shit sucks. COVID, healthcare prices, inflation, and millionaires, billionaires, multi-hundred billionaires sit there and live their most out-of-touch lives and push shit like AI on us. Well, we just have to sit here and suffer through it. It's really hard to villainize these characters when, in a way, I think we have, by and large, lived the same bullshit they have to one degree or another. It's very relatable. I mean, Norman starts his spree in soft terrorism through bad healthcare practices, something that is all too real in this world, with some people celebrating a high-profile killing of a healthcare executive. And despite what you think of that, it makes the story of the Riddler pretty timely. I think it's something the people of the lower 99% can pretty easily relate to. Being frustrated with your circumstances is relatable and next to universal. I think it's something this book does to an incredible effect, and each character is sympathetic as a result. That aside, I like that John Jackson Miller respected Sam Hamm's Batman echoes and tying his Riddler together with Sam Hamm's, despite the editorial mix-up. And I think with this kind of celebrity Riddler that was briefly around in Gotham through Norman Pincus, it kind of added up well that you would have Edward Maynard look up to him as some kind of messiah that created him as the second Riddler. So I think it all kind of worked out pretty well in the end. I like the stuff in this book that kind of links the original film with Batman Returns, giving endings to people like Knox who were not featured in the film sequel, and giving us more on people like Max Schreck. John Jackson Miller did a great job, and honestly, if you watch my novel reviews, he's done great work in Star Wars as well. I know he's done some Star Trek stuff too that I'll have to check out eventually. This and Batman Resurrection are a duology of books, so as of now, no other entries are planned as far as I know. What he does next is unannounced, but I'll certainly be tuning in, and if he chose to do another Batman book at some point in this continuity or even another continuity, I would certainly be excited to check it out. Anyhow, if you liked this, I'll link the first book in my end screen here.